In every age, monarchies have wrapped themselves in the shimmering fabric of continuity. The crowns, the orbs, the gilded carriages rolling down ancient streets. These are not simply symbols, but illusions carefully woven to persuade us that what is fragile is in fact eternal. Among all monarchies still standing, none looms larger in the global imagination than the British crown. To millions, it is not just a family, but an institution older than memory itself, a dynasty whose roots run so deep into history that to question them feels like blasphemy. Yet, in hushed tones, in corridors where history and rumor intertwine, there persists a whisper, an unsettling suggestion that somewhere beyond the palaces and pageantry exists a secret heir, a living person whose very existence could undo the royal story we have been told, and whose blood, flowing quietly through their veins, carries a claim more legitimate than the one seated upon the throne. The story is not a simple one. It stretches back centuries, through the tangled branches of family trees whose roots twist through war, betrayal, and hidden passion. It is not merely about politics or succession. It is about the power of narrative itself. For the monarchy is as much theater as it is governance. It has endured precisely because its image has been curated, pruned like a sacred garden, with inconvenient shoots quietly clipped away. But what if one branch survived in secret? What if, in the name of preserving stability, the rightful heir was concealed or erased, and history carefully rearranged so that the public never noticed? That possibility, even whispered, carries an explosive charge. Imagine it. The coronation of a king or queen, televised to the world, the golden crown lowered upon their head amid chants of ancient ritual. The cameras linger, the nation watches, and yet, what if at that very moment, in some quiet village, in some unnoticed city, there lives another who by blood alone has a stronger right to that throne? What if the carefully ordered pageantry is a masquerade, shielding us from a truth too dangerous to be spoken aloud? The idea is so destabilizing that for centuries it has been buried beneath silence, preserved only in fragments of rumor, in half-forgotten archives, in conspiracy theories dismissed as eccentric. But if even a fraction of it is true, the consequences are staggering. Why, one might ask, would such a truth need to be hidden? The answer lies not just in politics, but in psychology. Monarchies, especially the British monarchy, depend on the perception of inevitability. To admit that the line of succession might have been broken, usurped, or falsified is to pull at a thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. It would reveal the monarchy not as a sacred inheritance, but as a fragile performance, one that could be contested, one that could collapse under the weight of doubt. In a world already shifting uneasily, where faith in institutions erodes year by year, such a revelation could be catastrophic. And so, from generation to generation, these stories have lingered in the shadows. Some speak of the Plantagenet bloodline that was never truly extinguished, but driven underground after the Wars of the Roses. Others whisper of the Stuart claimants, exiled but never eradicated, their descendants weaving themselves quietly into European aristocracy. Still others hint at more recent secrets. Illegitimate children of monarchs whose existence was erased from record, heirs who, had they been acknowledged, would have redirected the entire course of modern royal history. Each thread is tantalizing, each rumor a window into a parallel history that might have been. But what makes this story truly unsettling is the possibility that such a hidden heir is not a figure of the distant past, but someone alive today. Think of it, a person walking among us, perhaps unaware of the full weight of their lineage, or perhaps very aware, bound by silence, waiting for a moment that may never come. They could be living an ordinary life, their ancestry, obscured by time and secrecy, or perhaps, somewhere in private, they have traced the papers, the DNA, the buried connections, and realized the truth of what flows in their blood. If revealed, such a person would not just contest a throne. They would shatter the story of continuity that underpins the monarchy itself. For it is not simply about who wears the crown. It is about the entire edifice of tradition, the idea that we can trace an unbroken line from William the Conqueror through Plantagenet, Tudor, Stuart, Hanover, Windsor, all the way to the present. To expose a fracture in that line is to expose the monarchy itself as fragile myth. As we begin this journey, let us set aside the polished image we have been presented and look instead at the shadows, the archives closed to the public, the letters whose ink hints at scandal, the genealogies that fork in strange and unexpected directions. Let us follow the trail of the whispered heir, not because we can say with certainty who they are, but because the very possibility forces us to question the narrative we have been told. For history, after all, is written not only by the victors, but by those who control the story. And the British monarchy, more than any other institution, has long been the master of narrative. This investigation will take us through forgotten wars and lost archives, through myths and conspiracies, through the interplay of legend and fact. We will encounter kings who vanished in battle, princes declared dead but never found, royal affairs that produced children hidden from the public eye. We will explore how secret societies, mystics, and even modern DNA science all converge on the same unsettling possibility that the true heir is not the one we see paraded on state occasions, but someone hidden, deliberately, strategically, or accidentally, from view. And at the end of this path lies a question we may never be able to answer fully. If the secret heir exists, would we ever be allowed to know? The silence surrounding this mystery is itself revealing. In an age where scandals of every kind, from political corruption to celebrity missteps, flood our screens, it is telling that whispers of alternative heirs are dismissed before they are even examined. Perhaps that is because, unlike other scandals, this one threatens the very foundation of a nation's identity. A hidden heir is not just a family embarrassment. It is a time bomb planted at the heart of the institution itself. It challenges the very idea of legitimacy, and in doing so, risks collapsing centuries of tradition in a single stroke. And so, we enter the labyrinth, guided by fragments and shadows, compelled by the allure of what might be hidden behind a veil. This is the story of the secret heir who, if revealed, could shatter the British monarchy, not simply because of who they are, but because of what their existence would mean. It is a story that lies at the crossroads of history and myth, where fact is obscured by secrecy, and where the truth, if uncovered, could rewrite the destiny of a nation. The British monarchy, perhaps more than any other institution on earth, has mastered the art of presentation. To the outside world, it is timeless, unbroken, a living bridge between the medieval and the modern. We see it in the coronation ceremonies draped in medieval ritual, in the gilded coaches rattling through London streets, in the carefully choreographed balcony appearances where the royal family waves to crowds as though acting out a scene written centuries before. Every gesture, every robe, every trumpet fanfare carries a message. This is continuity. This is permanence. This is the same crown that rested on the heads of kings and queens stretching back into antiquity. But continuity is as much performance as it is fact. Behind the shimmering facade of rituals lies a history full of fractures, scandals, and abrupt shifts, moments when the story nearly unraveled. To preserve the illusion of timelessness, inconvenient truths had to be hidden, rewritten, or outright erased. For most people, those complexities are invisible because the pageantry works as intended. The monarchy does not simply exist. It persuades. It persuades the nation, and indeed the world, that the line of succession has marched forward without serious interruption for 1,000 years. The image is so strong that to question it feels like an act of heresy. Consider the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. The cameras were invited into Westminster Abbey for the first time, transforming the ancient rite into a global spectacle. Millions around the world tuned in to watch a young woman, draped in ermine and gold, take vows that seemed to echo back into eternity. The broadcast gave the impression of unbroken continuity, as though Elizabeth were stepping seamlessly into a chain stretching back to William the Conqueror. What the cameras did not show, what they could not show, was the fragility of that chain. The abdication crisis of 1936 had shattered the illusion only 2 decades earlier, when Edward VIII, pressured by political scandal, stepped aside. The crown had passed, not to his children, because he had none, but to his brother, setting the stage for Elizabeth herself. That transfer of power, though smoothed over by official narrative, was in reality a rupture, a reminder that the so-called unbroken line is often maintained only through improvisation and suppression. The illusion of continuity depends on forgetting. The public remembers the grand spectacles, but forgets the contested moments. Civil wars fought over succession, rival branches of the family claiming the throne, parliaments and armies deciding who should rule when bloodline alone was insufficient. The Wars of the Roses in the 15th century saw rival dynasties, the Lancasters and Yorks, slaughter one another for the crown, until Henry Tudor seized it through conquest and married into legitimacy. The Tudors themselves were not heirs in the strictest sense, but political survivors who rewrote the script, transforming themselves into the rightful rulers in the eyes of posterity. This is the paradox. The monarchy insists on unbroken legitimacy, even as its very survival has often depended on interruption, manipulation, and revision. The story that is told to the people is one of sacred lineage, ordained and unquestionable. The reality is far more precarious, a dynasty that has had to reinvent itself repeatedly, smoothing over fractures with myth and ritual. It is precisely in these cracks that whispers of secret heirs take root. For if the official line is not as unbroken as we are led to believe, then who is to say that the true heir was not sidelined, hidden, or erased somewhere along the way? The monarchy's power is not derived solely from law or politics, but from its mastery of symbolism. The royal standard flying over Buckingham Palace is not just a flag. It is a claim, a statement of legitimacy. The regalia displayed in the Tower of London, the crown jewels, the scepter, the orb, are more than museum pieces. They are props in a theater of continuity, reassuring subjects that the authority of the monarch is ancient and sacred. And yet, those very objects have changed hands through conquest, theft, and revolution. They are symbols of permanence forged in the fires of impermanence. In the modern age, this illusion has become both stronger and more fragile. Stronger, because mass media spreads the carefully managed image of monarchy farther than ever before. Fragile, because in an age of information, cracks in the story are harder to conceal. The public now has access to archives, genetic science, and a global web of conspiracy and speculation. The same media that amplifies the monarchy's grandeur also spreads the whispers that threaten it. Each documentary, each leaked letter, each whispered rumor of illegitimacy or hidden heirs undermines the story that the crown relies upon. This tension between image and reality is at the heart of the British monarchy's survival. To endure, it must appear ancient, inevitable, and beyond dispute. To maintain that appearance, it must suppress or obscure the moments when its survival depended on anything but inevitability. And so, the monarchy becomes a paradoxical creature, fragile in reality, but powerful in perception, dependent on secrecy, yet projecting openness, endlessly reinvented, yet insisting it has never changed. It is within this paradox that the idea of a secret heir becomes so destabilizing. For if the public has been taught to see the monarchy as unbroken, then proof of a hidden or suppressed bloodline would not simply challenge one monarch. It would unravel the illusion itself. It would reveal the monarchy for what it truly is, not a sacred chain stretching back into time immemorial, but a carefully constructed story, vulnerable to the truth. And in that moment of revelation, the power of the crown, which rests on belief as much as law, could crumble. As we move deeper into this story, it is important to hold this paradox in mind. The British monarchy thrives on continuity, but continuity is not the same as truth. The grandeur we see on television is the surface of a deeper, more fragile reality. And it is precisely because of that fragility that the whispers of hidden heirs, long dismissed as conspiracy or fantasy, demand to be examined. For they strike at the very heart of the illusion, reminding us that beneath the pageantry lies a dynasty held together not by inevitability, but by narrative, secrecy, and suppression. Throughout Europe's long and tangled history, monarchies have been haunted by shadows, ghosts of claimants who, though pushed aside, never quite disappeared. To study the story of lost heirs is to recognize a repeating pattern. Dynasties rise, dynasties fracture, and always, somewhere, there lingers the possibility of an alternative line, hidden yet alive. This is not unique to Britain. The phenomenon of the secret heir is woven deeply into the very fabric of European history. Consider the most famous example, the Romanovs of Russia. In 1918, amid the chaos of revolution, Tsar Nicholas II and his family were executed in a basement in Ekaterinburg. Officially, their line ended that day. Yet almost immediately, rumors began to spread. Some whispered that one of the children, perhaps the youngest daughter Anastasia, had escaped. For decades, women came forward claiming to be her, the most famous being Anna Anderson in the 1920s. Though science has since cast doubt on these stories, the allure of the hidden heir never died. The possibility that one fragile thread of royal blood survived the carnage gave hope to monarchists and fueled conspiracy for generations. The Bourbons of France faced a similar fate. During the French Revolution, King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were guillotined. Their young son, Louis Charles, the Dauphin, was declared King Louis XVII by royalists, though he was only 8 years old. Officially, he died in captivity in 1795. But rumors insisted he had been smuggled out, replaced with another child, his true identity hidden for safety. Over 100 claimants emerged across the following century, each presenting himself as the lost boy king. Some even convinced communities of their authenticity. The legend of the lost Dauphin persisted long after his supposed death, a ghostly reminder that monarchies rarely die as cleanly as official history suggests. Closer to Britain, the Stuarts provide yet another example. After James II was deposed in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, his supporters rallied around his son, James Francis Edward Stuart, known as the Old Pretender. For decades, the Jacobite cause sought to restore him and his heirs to the throne. Though their rebellions ultimately failed, whispers continued. Even when the male Stuart line appeared to end with the death of Cardinal Henry Benedict Stuart in 1807, Jacobite societies quietly traced collateral branches, claiming the blood had not vanished but dispersed into continental nobility. The story of the king over the water lived on, not just as politics, but as myth, a reminder that legitimacy often survives in exile. These examples highlight something essential. The line between extinction and survival is often blurred. Monarchies, unlike democracies, derive their authority not from institutions, but from blood. As long as that blood exists, somewhere, the possibility of a rival heir exists too. Even when a dynasty is toppled, its supporters search desperately for evidence that the line continues, hidden, waiting for restoration. In this way, the idea of the secret heir is less about fact and more about faith. It becomes a kind of secular religion, sustaining hope even when the throne itself is lost. Britain has watched these dramas unfold with a mixture of fascination and unease, because it has not been immune to the same vulnerabilities. Every time a European monarchy was threatened by claimants from the shadows, it revealed a truth uncomfortable for the Windsors and their predecessors. Royal authority is never absolute. It depends on acceptance, on recognition, and on control of the narrative. The existence of a rival claimant, even one without power, can be enough to weaken a throne, to fracture loyalties, to sow doubt. And so, Britain developed a keen interest in suppressing or erasing its own alternative lines. The lesson from history was clear. allow rumors to flourish, and they can destabilize a kingdom. The French monarchy never recovered from the myth of the lost dauphin. The Romanovs became a perpetual subject of haunting speculation. The Stuarts, though politically defeated, still threatened the Hanoverian dynasty with the sheer persistence of their claim. To avoid a similar fate, the British crown learned to manage its past with careful precision, burying stories that might allow whispers of rival heirs to grow. Yet suppression does not erase possibility. If anything, it fuels it. The more carefully history is curated, the more people wonder what is missing, what has been hidden, what truth lies beneath the polished veneer. Each lost heir from continental Europe adds weight to the suspicion that Britain, too, may harbor its own. After all, if monarchs elsewhere could be overthrown, exiled, or executed, only for descendants to surface generations later, why should Britain be immune? The pattern is too consistent to ignore. The fascination with hidden heirs also speaks to something deeper in human imagination. Across cultures, we find myths of the hidden king, the rightful ruler who, though exiled or thought dead, will one day return. From the Arthurian legend of the once and future king to medieval prophecies of kings in hiding, the archetype is universal. It expresses a longing for legitimacy, for justice, for a ruler untouched by corruption. In times of uncertainty, people turn to the possibility of a hidden heir as a symbol of restoration. It is both political and spiritual, both history and myth. In the British context, this archetype is especially powerful. The monarchy's survival depends on projecting inevitability, but its history is riddled with ruptures. Each rupture creates the possibility of a hidden heir. Each whisper of illegitimacy, each child born in secrecy, each line quietly continued in exile adds to the suspicion that the true king or queen is not the one wearing the crown, but someone living in obscurity. Just as France had its lost dauphin, Russia its missing princess, and Scotland its exiled pretender, so too might Britain have its secret heir, an heir whose existence, if revealed, would undermine the very foundation of the monarchy. And so, when we hear whispers of a British heir concealed, we must place them in this broader European pattern. They are not anomalies. They are part of a recurring drama, one that has played out across centuries and across nations. Monarchies are always vulnerable to ghosts of bloodlines past, because monarchy is nothing without blood. The secret heir, whether real or imagined, embodies the monarchy's greatest fear, that its legitimacy is not unshakable, but precarious, fragile, and always at risk of being claimed by someone else. As we move forward, we carry with us this lesson from Europe's fractured dynasties. The story of the hidden heir is never just about one family or one throne. It is a pattern, a cycle, a haunting that recurs wherever crowns and dynasties attempt to project permanence. And in Britain, perhaps more than anywhere else, the stage is set for such a figure to emerge. For if history is any guide, the question is not whether a secret heir could exist, but whether we would ever be allowed to know. The Wars of the Roses were more than a brutal struggle for power. They were a rupture in English history that left scars still visible today. The Plantagenets, who had ruled England for over 3 centuries, were torn apart by internal rivalries between 2 branches of the family, Lancaster and York. Cousins fought cousins, brothers betrayed brothers, and for 30 years England was racked by civil war. By the time the Tudors emerged victorious in 1485, the landscape of English royalty had been reshaped, but not erased. For though the Tudors claimed to have brought stability, the Plantagenet bloodline did not vanish entirely. It slipped into the shadows, where whispers insist it continues even now. To understand the danger posed by a secret Plantagenet heir, we must first see the dynasty in its full power. The Plantagenets were not minor figures. They were the architects of medieval England. Kings like Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, and Edward III built empires, fought crusades, and left legacies that defined the nation. Their line was immense, sprawling, producing countless cadet branches. By the 15th century, however, this abundance of heirs became their downfall. Competing claims to the throne set the stage for a blood-soaked struggle that consumed England. The Yorkists, led by Edward IV, seized the crown, only for his brother Richard III to take it under shadow of suspicion. Richard's reign was short, and his name became infamous, not least because of the disappearance of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, last seen alive under their uncle's guardianship. Were they murdered to secure Richard's crown? Or, as some whisper, were they smuggled away, their descendants left to live in secrecy, forever a threat to the ruling dynasty? Richard III himself met his end at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, slain in combat as Henry Tudor seized victory. The Tudors, eager to legitimize their fragile claim, painted Richard as a monster and declared the Plantagenet menace extinguished. Yet the truth was more complicated. Many Plantagenets survived. Some were executed in the years following Bosworth. Others quietly married into noble houses across England and the continent. The bloodline, diluted perhaps, but unbroken, continued. Take the case of Edward, Earl of Warwick, the nephew of Edward IV and last legitimate male Plantagenet. A boy imprisoned in the Tower, he was executed by Henry VII to prevent rebellion. Yet doubts linger. Was it truly Warwick who was killed, or was a double substituted? The uncertainty gave rise to pretenders like Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, one of the missing princes. Though dismissed as an impostor, Warbeck attracted serious support from European monarchs, evidence that even outside England, the Plantagenet claim was considered plausible. And then there is the curious fact that centuries later, the bones of Richard III were unearthed beneath a car park in Leicester, his remains confirmed by DNA testing in 2012. The test did more than identify a skeleton. It opened a door. Genetic tracing of Richard's line revealed breaks and surprises in the royal bloodline, suggesting that the neat succession presented in history books may be far less certain than we imagine. If Richard's line can be traced and tested, why not others? And what might we discover if those tests were applied to rival claimants still alive today? Indeed, Plantagenet blood has not disappeared. Genealogists have identified numerous living descendants, some quite ordinary individuals, far removed from palaces and crowns. For example, Michael Ibsen, a Canadian-born carpenter, was revealed to be a direct descendant of Richard III's sister. His DNA was crucial in confirming Richard's remains. The symbolism was striking. The modern descendant of a Plantagenet princess helping to restore her brother's honor 5 centuries later. Yet it raises a tantalizing question. If ordinary people today carry Plantagenet blood, might there also exist a direct and legitimate heir, overlooked or suppressed, whose claim would outshine that of the Tudors and their successors? The potential threat posed by such an heir is enormous. The Tudor dynasty, after all, justified its rule by defeating Richard III and marrying Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the rival houses. If a Plantagenet heir with a stronger claim had survived, then every monarch since Henry VII, including the current House of Windsor, would technically be usurpers. The monarchy's carefully cultivated illusion of continuity would crumble, exposed as a dynasty built on conquest and suppression rather than legitimacy. Historians, of course, prefer certainty. Official narratives insist that the Wars of the Roses ended decisively at Bosworth, that the Tudors unified England, and that rival claimants were eliminated. Yet history rarely ties itself so neatly. Consider how many Plantagenet branches extended into Europe. Portugal, Spain, even Poland bore traces of the dynasty. Intermarriages with continental aristocracy mean that Plantagenet bloodlines could easily have continued in obscurity, their significance forgotten, only to re-emerge centuries later. For the monarchy, this is not just an academic issue. The discovery of Richard III's remains reignited public fascination with alternative royal lines, and it quietly alarmed those who prefer such questions to stay buried. If DNA testing can reveal surprises in one corner of history, what might it expose elsewhere? Could it uncover not only forgotten branches, but also hidden heirs with stronger claims than the Windsors? And if so, how long could such truths be suppressed? The Plantagenet shadow lingers over every coronation. Each time a monarch is crowned, the crown rests uneasily on the knowledge that their claim rests not on inevitability, but on the victory of one family over another. The Wars of the Roses may be centuries past, but the blood spilled then still flows in living veins. The Tudors may have won, but they did not erase their rivals. They merely drove them underground. And so, the possibility of a Plantagenet heir, legitimate, hidden, and potentially more rightful than any Tudor or Windsor, remains one of the monarchy's most haunting vulnerabilities. As we move deeper into this exploration, we must keep the Plantagenet question in mind. It is the template for all that follows. A dynasty toppled, its heirs declared extinguished, and yet the whispers refuse to die. For if the Plantagenets, once thought vanquished, still cast a shadow, then perhaps the story of a hidden heir is not myth at all, but a recurring truth. And in that truth lies a possibility that could still, even now, shatter the British monarchy. The glorious revolution of 1688 is remembered in Britain as a turning point, the moment when parliamentary power triumphed over the divine right of kings. But for all its glory, it left a wound that never truly healed: the exile of the Stuart dynasty. James II, the last Catholic monarch of England, was driven from the throne and replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband, William of Orange. To Whigs and Protestants, this was a triumph of liberty. To others, it was a usurpation. For in exile, James II still had a son, a boy who would become the symbol of a rival claim to the throne that refused to die. That boy was James Francis Edward Stuart, born in 1688, just months before his father was overthrown. To his supporters, he was James III of England and VIII of Scotland. To his enemies, he was the old pretender, a usurper in waiting. For decades, his presence on the continent haunted British politics. His claim divided families, armies, and even nations, sparking uprisings that would echo across the 18th century. He was more than a man. He was the embodiment of a question: who truly had the right to rule Britain? The Jacobites, named after Jacobus, the Latin for James, became the banner-bearers of his cause. They were not merely romantics clinging to the past. They were a genuine political force, supported by France, Spain, and other European powers eager to destabilize Britain. Twice, they attempted to bring their exiled king home. The 1715 Rising, led by the Earl of Mar in Scotland, declared James III rightful king. For a moment, the cause seemed on the brink of success, but poor planning and lack of momentum led to collapse. James himself arrived too late, a ghostly figure stepping into a rebellion already defeated. Yet the Jacobite dream refused to die. In 1745, hope ignited once more, this time under his son, Charles Edward Stuart, the man history remembers as Bonnie Prince Charlie. Tall, charismatic, and handsome, Charles became the face of the Jacobite cause. Landing in Scotland with a handful of companions, he raised the Stuart banner and rallied Highland clans to his side. Against all odds, they swept south, capturing Edinburgh, defeating government forces at Prestonpans, and marching deep into England. For a brief moment, the Stuarts stood on the threshold of reclaiming the throne. But fate intervened. At Derby, with London within reach, hesitation and lack of support forced a retreat. The rebellion culminated in disaster at the Battle of Culloden in 1746, where government forces crushed the Jacobites in a brutal slaughter. The dream of Stuart restoration was drowned in blood on the Scottish moors. Charles fled into exile, becoming a wandering relic of a lost cause. Yet even then, the myth of the rightful king refused to vanish. In taverns and farmhouses, Jacobite songs were sung in secret, and toasts were raised to the king over the water. What makes the Jacobite legacy so haunting is not just the rebellions themselves, but the persistence of the claim. Even after Charles's defeat, Stuart supporters refused to acknowledge the Hanoverians who ruled in London. When Charles died in 1788 without legitimate heirs, the mantle passed to his younger brother, Henry Benedict Stuart, a Catholic cardinal. Known as King Henry IX to Jacobites, his position embodied the strange tension of the claim. A man of the church, celibate and childless, holding the title of king in theory, but never in fact. His death in 1807 seemed to end the Stuart line forever. Yet genealogies have a way of surprising us. While the direct male line of the Stuarts ended with Henry, collateral branches survived through daughters and cousins. Some of these lines intermarried with European nobility, quietly dispersing Stuart blood across the continent. In fact, the senior Jacobite claim after Henry's death passed to the House of Savoy in Italy, then later to the House of Modena, and eventually into the House of Bavaria. To this day, the current Jacobite heir is Franz, Duke of Bavaria, a quiet figure who has never pressed a claim, but whose ancestry traces directly back to the exiled Stuarts. Here lies the unsettling truth. The Jacobite claim was never truly extinguished. It was absorbed, hidden, transformed into a ghostly lineage that still exists in the blood of European nobility. While Britain celebrates its Hanoverian and Windsor monarchs as inevitable rulers, the existence of a parallel line, descendants of James II, remains a shadow, a reminder that legitimacy is never as secure as it seems. But the story does not end in Europe's palaces. Some historians and genealogists suggest that not all of the Stuart descendants remained within royal circles. There are persistent rumors of illegitimate children, of secret marriages, of lines that slipped away into obscurity. In this telling, the Jacobite cause did not die with Culloden or with Henry Benedict Stuart. It went underground. Supporters spoke in code, preserved relics, and whispered genealogies that pointed to heirs hidden among common folk, heirs who might one day rise if history turned again. Even today, in Scottish lore, the Jacobite cause lingers like a phantom. The songs of the 45 are still sung, the memory of Culloden still mourned, and the dream of a Stuart king still surfaces in folk traditions. The idea of the king over the water resonates with something deeper than politics. It touches myth. It recalls the archetype of the exiled king destined to return, a theme echoed in legends of King Arthur and other hidden rulers. The Jacobite heir, whether in Bavaria's palaces or in whispered Scottish genealogies, embodies that myth. The rightful monarch, waiting unseen. For the British monarchy, this is a dangerous memory. The official narrative insists on continuity, on legitimacy passing smoothly from the Hanoverians to the Windsors. But the Jacobite shadow reveals an alternative story, one in which the true heirs were exiled, defeated, but never extinguished. If one were to take the Jacobite line seriously, then every British monarch since 1688, George I through to Charles III, sits on a throne that is, in theory, usurped. The rightful king would be not in London, but in Bavaria. Of course, no modern government would allow such a claim to disturb the state. The Jacobite succession is treated as a curiosity, a relic of the past, something for historians and hobbyists. But the idea cannot be so easily dismissed, for it shows how fragile the story of legitimacy really is. A single political upheaval, a single decision by Parliament, and the line of succession shifted forever. The Stuarts became ghosts, and the Hanoverians became kings. But bloodlines do not disappear so easily. They flow quietly onward, waiting in obscurity, their existence a silent challenge to the official story. The Jacobite cause teaches us that legitimacy is never absolute. It is always contested, always vulnerable to the possibility of an alternative heir. And just as whispers of a lost dauphin haunted France, and rumors of Anastasia haunted Russia, so too does the shadow of the Stuarts still linger over Britain. The king over the water may be long gone, but the idea of a hidden heir remains, ready to unsettle the monarchy whenever cracks appear in its carefully maintained facade. Kings and queens have always projected an image of sacred lineage, as though their blood were pure, unbroken, and divinely ordained. Yet the reality of monarchy is far messier. Behind the palace walls, in hidden chambers and discreet encounters, royals have engaged in affairs, secret liaisons, and relationships that produced children the world was never meant to acknowledge. These illegitimate lines, though often erased from official record, are the cracks through which history's secrets leak. For if even one of those children carried forward a stronger hereditary claim, then the throne we see today may be occupied not by the rightful heir, but by the beneficiary of careful suppression. The phenomenon of royal illegitimacy is as old as monarchy itself. Medieval kings were notorious for their mistresses, and their bastards were sometimes openly acknowledged. William the Conqueror himself was born illegitimate, yet he seized a crown and earned the epithet the bastard without shame. Centuries later, Charles II fathered a staggering number of illegitimate children, more than a dozen acknowledged, and perhaps many more unrecorded. Though none could inherit the throne under English law, they were often elevated to dukedoms and titles, their bloodlines seeping into the noble fabric of the nation. The Dukes of Richmond, Grafton, and St. Albans all trace their origins to Charles II's affairs. These offspring remind us that illegitimacy was less about blood and more about politics. A child born out of wedlock might carry the same royal blood as any prince, yet be excluded from succession by law. But law can change, and legitimacy is often defined not by birth alone, but by recognition. If an illegitimate line could be hidden or later legitimized, its descendants might hold claims more ancient and more valid than the reigning monarch. That is the danger, the possibility that a bastard line, buried in obscurity, could someday be revealed as the truer heir. Consider Henry VIII, whose desperate quest for a male heir is one of the most famous stories in English history. While his 6 marriages are legendary, less often discussed are the illegitimate children rumored to be his. Henry acknowledged one, Henry Fitzroy, whom he made Duke of Richmond and Somerset. Had Fitzroy lived longer, it is not inconceivable that Parliament might have legitimized him, altering the course of history. Instead, Fitzroy died young, and Henry's legitimate line collapsed into turmoil, paving the way for the Tudors' eventual end. Yet rumors persisted of other children, unacknowledged but whispered about in courtly circles. If true, their descendants would carry Tudor blood, hidden in plain sight. The secrecy surrounding illegitimate lines was not limited to the Tudors. The Hanoverian kings, too, were dogged by scandal. George III, remembered for his madness, was rumored to have fathered children outside his marriage. His son, George IV, was infamous for excess and debauchery, leaving behind stories of affairs and possible offspring. Even Victoria's uncles and cousins were whispered to have produced illegitimate branches, some of which may still exist in obscurity today. Each of these rumors, if proven, would complicate the neat genealogy presented by official histories. But it is not only distant centuries that matter. In more modern times, questions of illegitimacy continue to haunt the monarchy. Edward VII, the son of Queen Victoria, was long rumored to be the child not of Prince Albert, but of another man altogether, a theory historians debate to this day. If true, then the entire line descending from him, including the Windsors, might technically rest on shaky ground. Such rumors are rarely pursued in depth, for the implications are too destabilizing. Better to dismiss them as idle gossip than to risk unraveling the fabric of royal legitimacy. What makes the question of illegitimate lines so powerful is its invisibility. Official records can be falsified or destroyed. Births can be concealed. A child can be raised under another name, their identity erased from public knowledge. Yet blood remains, passed down quietly through generations. The carpenter, the farmer, the shopkeeper of today may carry within them the DNA of kings, unaware that history has hidden their ancestry. For every official heir in a gilded carriage, there may be dozens of unofficial heirs walking unnoticed among us. Some of these stories border on myth, yet they reveal a consistent pattern. The monarchy survives not by blood alone, but by control of the story. If an illegitimate line threatens the official heir, it must be erased, discredited, or ignored. The case of James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, is a chilling example. The illegitimate son of Charles II, Monmouth led a rebellion in 1685, claiming the crown for himself. His cause was crushed, and he was executed. But the very fact that thousands rallied to him reveals the potency of illegitimate blood when married to ambition. Monmouth's descendants, had they survived, would have remained a quiet challenge to the throne for generations. And then there are the quieter stories, the ones whispered rather than fought. Letters between courtiers hint at royal affairs, children quietly adopted or spirited away. Diaries suggest encounters carefully concealed from the public eye. Genealogists, when tracing noble families, sometimes stumble upon branches that vanish suddenly, as though deliberately obscured. Each of these fragments raises a possibility that the true story of Britain's monarchy is not the polished succession of official heirs, but a far more chaotic web of legitimate and illegitimate lines, some known, others hidden. For the crown, this is an existential threat. If one illegitimate line could be proven to descend directly from a monarch in such a way as to supersede the official succession, it would call into question not only the current monarch's right to rule, but the very structure of monarchy itself. After all, if legitimacy can be rewritten by discovery, then no throne is ever truly secure. The royal family depends on the belief that the line is unbroken, that the blood is pure, that history is settled. The revelation of a hidden, illegitimate heir would shatter that illusion, exposing the monarchy as fragile, contingent, and dependent on suppression. The existence of illegitimate lines reminds us of a truth monarchies would rather forget. Blood is not so easily contained. It spills across boundaries, across classes, across generations. It survives in unexpected places, waiting for a moment when history might look again and realize that the rightful heir is not the one enthroned in splendor, but the one hidden in shadow. And in that possibility lies the monarchy's greatest vulnerability, for the illegitimate heir is both everywhere and nowhere, both forgotten and unforgettable, both erased from history and yet alive within it. Queen Victoria is remembered as the very embodiment of respectability, the matriarch of an empire upon which the sun never set. She is cast in bronze and marble as the stern but dutiful grandmother of the nation, her name lending itself to an entire age of moral discipline and imperial grandeur. Yet beneath the statues and portraits lies a very different story, one that has fueled whispers for nearly 2 centuries. For in her youth, long before she became the longest reigning monarch of her era, Victoria was surrounded by scandal, secrecy, and rumor. And at the heart of those rumors lies a tantalizing suggestion that the queen who shaped an empire may have had a hidden child. The circumstances of Victoria's early life made such speculation inevitable. She was born in 1819 at Kensington Palace, the daughter of Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. But her father died when she was just 8 months old, leaving her mother and the ambitious Sir John Conroy, her comptroller, as the dominant influences in her childhood. Conroy's role has long been a subject of controversy. To some historians, he was a manipulative opportunist who sought to control the young princess and her mother, engineering what became known as the Kensington system, a rigid, isolating regimen designed to keep Victoria dependent. To others, he was simply an ambitious courtier. Yet in the shadows of that relationship, whispers grew. The first rumor was of intimacy between Conroy and the Duchess of Kent, Victoria's mother. Whispers suggested that Conroy wielded more influence than mere duty allowed, and that their closeness may have crossed boundaries. If true, it would have cast a shadow over Victoria's legitimacy itself. But the rumors did not stop there. Some went further, suggesting that Conroy's closeness to the young princess herself was inappropriate, and that a hidden scandal may have emerged in her teenage years. It was here that the first stories of a concealed pregnancy took root. The idea of a hidden child born to the teenage Victoria has surfaced in various forms. One version claims that in the early 1830s, before she ascended the throne, Victoria bore a child in secret, spirited away to prevent dynastic chaos. Another suggests that the child was the result of a relationship with John Conroy, a possibility that, if true, would have thrown the entire legitimacy of the British monarchy into doubt. Of course, mainstream historians dismiss these tales as gossip, born of political rivalry and Victorian appetite for scandal. Yet fragments of evidence keep the embers alive. There are scattered accounts of servants dismissed suddenly from Kensington, of unexplained absences in Victoria's public appearances, of letters from courtiers hinting at trouble in the household. Even after Victoria's accession in 1837, rumors persisted that there was someone, perhaps a woman, living in quiet obscurity in the English countryside, supported by discreet royal funds. A handful of genealogists have claimed to trace lines of descent from such a figure, though proof remains elusive. The scandal deepens when we recall how fiercely Victoria despised John Conroy. Once she came to the throne, one of her first acts was to banish him from court entirely. She never forgave him for his attempts to control her youth. But was her hatred purely political, or did it conceal something more personal? Perhaps the bitterness of a secret that had to be buried forever? Some have argued that her animosity was so extreme that it betrays a deeper history, one too dangerous to be spoken of publicly. What makes these rumors so disruptive is the sheer scale of their implications. If Victoria truly bore a child before her marriage to Prince Albert, the entire line of succession would have shifted. Her 9 children with Albert, who went on to populate Europe's thrones, might not have been the rightful heirs at all. The grandmother of Europe, whose descendants include kings and queens across the continent, may have been only half the story. Somewhere, hidden away, another line may have existed, one erased from official memory, but carrying blood more immediate than any crowned descendant of Victoria. This possibility has attracted the attention of esoteric researchers who connect it to broader theories of suppressed bloodlines. Some suggest that this secret child was integrated into aristocratic families under a false name, their descendants quietly intermarrying with the nobility. Others claim that records of this hidden line were deliberately destroyed, leaving only faint traces. Letters missing from archives, portraits retouched, names struck from family trees. In such a world, the absence of evidence is not proof of innocence, but the sign of deliberate erasure. There are even those who tie the theory to Victoria's intense grief at the death of Prince Albert in 1861. They point to her obsession with seclusion, her lifelong mourning, and her curious attachment to certain servants, men like John Brown and Abdul Karim, as signs of a woman wrestling not only with loss, but with secrets from her youth. Could the queen who insisted on respectability have spent her life concealing a scandal from her earliest years? And could it be that her descendants today, the Windsors, owe their claim to a story carefully rewritten to hide the existence of a more legitimate heir? Mainstream historians are quick to dismiss such speculation, insisting that no credible evidence exists of a secret child. Yet history is written by those who control the archives, and the royal family has always been meticulous in protecting its image. Letters are destroyed, diaries redacted, records sealed. What appears in the official record is not always what happened, but what those in power wished posterity to believe. And if a secret child truly existed, the incentive to conceal it would have been overwhelming. The fascination with this theory endures because it touches a nerve at the heart of monarchy, the fear that legitimacy is fragile. The Victorians built an empire on ideals of morality, family, and stability. If its very figurehead had carried a secret so scandalous, the empire's foundation would have been shaken. That is why the story, whether true or not, continues to echo in whispers. It is not simply about Queen Victoria. It is about the possibility that every monarch since may stand upon a carefully hidden deception. And so the question lingers. Did Victoria, in the shadows of Kensington Palace, bring a child into the world who was quietly erased from history? If so, where did that line go? Could the descendants of that hidden heir walk among us today, unknowing or perhaps very aware of the blood they carry? We cannot say for certain. But the very existence of the rumor reveals how vulnerable even the most celebrated monarchs are to the power of secrets. For if Victoria's reign hid such a truth, then the British monarchy is not the unbroken pillar it pretends to be, but a story written with deliberate omissions, its continuity more fragile than we dare imagine. When Edward VIII abdicated the throne in December 1936, the world was stunned. For the first time in modern history, a British monarch voluntarily relinquished the crown, not for politics or war, but for love. At least, that is the official story. The fairy tale narrative of a king who could not carry the heavy burden of kingship without the help and support of the woman I love has been enshrined in history books, newsreels, and romantic legend. Yet beneath the surface lies a darker, more troubling tale, one that suggests Edward's abdication was less about love and more about secrets too dangerous to be revealed. The bare facts are well known. Edward, who became king in January 1936 after the death of his father George V, was deeply infatuated with Wallis Simpson, an American socialite twice divorced. The Church of England opposed their union, as did the government, since a king was also head of the church. Faced with the choice between the crown and Wallis, Edward chose the latter, abdicating in favor of his younger brother, who became George VI. But from the very beginning, this explanation felt incomplete. Was it truly impossible for the King of Britain, head of a vast empire, commander of immense resources, to find a way to marry the woman he loved? Or was the abdication for love a convenient cover story, concealing deeper forces at work? Whispers of scandal surrounded Edward even before he met Wallis. He had a reputation for recklessness, both in his personal life and in politics. Rumors of affairs with married women, secret liaisons, and even illegitimate children followed him. Unlike other royals, Edward was careless, sometimes leaving traces, letters, gifts, gossip, that later courtiers had to suppress. One persistent story suggests that in his youth, Edward fathered a child with a French courtesan, a boy who was quietly raised abroad with financial support from discreet royal funds. Others claim he may have had an illegitimate daughter hidden in the aristocracy, her descendants merging with British nobility. If true, the existence of such heirs could have created dangerous questions about succession, especially if the child was born before his younger brother, George VI, took the throne. Then there were Edward's politics. During the 1930s, he was openly sympathetic to Germany. He admired Hitler's authoritarian style, and both he and Wallis visited Germany in 1937, where they were photographed giving Nazi salutes. Some historians suggest he even shared intelligence with German officials, while others claim he discussed the possibility of returning to the throne as a Nazi puppet should Britain fall during World War II. Such allegations, if confirmed, would have made his position untenable. Could it be that his abdication was orchestrated not to save his love, but to prevent his sympathies and possible treachery from destabilizing the crown? Official archives shed tantalizing hints. Files released decades later revealed MI5 and FBI surveillance of both Edward and Wallis, uncovering their connections to known Nazi sympathizers. Secret reports warned the government that the king's personal conduct posed a national security risk. But the most explosive files remain locked away, embargoed for decades, perhaps forever. Why? What do these documents contain that is still too dangerous to reveal? Some researchers believe they include proof of illegitimate children, paternity claims, or direct collusion with Nazi officials. Scandals that would not only taint Edward, but cast a shadow on the legitimacy of his entire family line. Wallis herself is central to the mystery. Far from the romantic heroine of the abdication story, she was deeply entangled in elite European circles, moving easily among aristocrats, bankers, and political operatives. Some intelligence reports even suggested she acted as an intermediary for German intelligence. If true, Edward's obsession with her may not have been a matter of love alone, but a dangerous entanglement that placed the monarchy itself at risk. Perhaps the abdication was less a sacrifice and more a removal, an orchestrated solution to neutralize a king who had become a liability. There's another layer still. Some genealogists and hidden heir theorists suggest that Edward's abdication was used to erase potential claims to the throne. If Edward had fathered illegitimate children before or during his reign, those children could, under certain interpretations of hereditary law, have posed rival claims. The abdication, followed by his childless marriage to Wallis, neatly tied off the line, ensuring the crown passed securely to George VI and his descendants. In this telling, the abdication was not only a matter of political expedience, but an act of dynastic containment, an effort to bury inconvenient heirs beneath the weight of a romantic legend. The aftermath strengthens the suspicion. Edward and Wallis were exiled to France, given the title Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and quietly kept under surveillance for the rest of their lives. They were never allowed to return to positions of influence, their movements closely monitored. Even their correspondence was intercepted. Why such paranoia? If the abdication had been purely a matter of love, it suggests that those in power feared what they might reveal, or what others might reveal about them. Consider the symbolic irony. The monarchy, which thrives on the myth of divine continuity, was shaken not by war, but by the possibility of scandal. A king was removed not with violence, but with a carefully crafted story designed to protect the crown's dignity. The official version, that Edward gave up everything for love, was palatable, even romantic. But behind the curtain, another truth may have lurked, that he was forced out, not for whom he loved, but for what he knew, what he had done, and who might claim descent from him. The abdication remains one of the most heavily mythologized events in modern royal history. But it is precisely this myth-making that invites suspicion. Whenever a story is too neat, too cinematic, we must ask, what has been edited out? And in Edward's case, the missing chapters point not to romance, but to intrigue. Was there a hidden heir, quietly erased from succession? Did Edward's sympathies for Germany pose such a threat that his removal was orchestrated long before the public narrative took shape? Or was it both? An intersection of political danger and personal scandal that forced the monarchy to choose between exposure and legend? We may never know the full truth, for the archives remain sealed and the key players long dead. But the question continues to haunt the Windsor dynasty. For if Edward VIII's abdication was not what it seemed, then the monarchy we see today, built on the stability of George VI and Elizabeth II, rests on a foundation of secrets. Secrets that, if revealed, could shatter the carefully crafted story of continuity. The abdication, then, is not simply history. It is a warning that even in the 20th century, with newspapers and cameras and parliaments watching, the monarchy could still weave a legend to conceal its fragility. And if it could do so in 1936, what else might it still be hiding? History is not just what is written in books. It is what survives the fire of censorship, the locked cabinets of archives, the deliberate erasures of those in power. And when it comes to the British monarchy, the official record is not an open chronicle, but a carefully curated mosaic. What we see is what we are allowed to see. Behind the glass walls of the British Library, the Windsor Archives, and the vaults of the National Archives lie files sealed for decades, even centuries. Some are locked away until 2060, 2080, or indefinitely. The question we must ask is simple. What truths lie buried there, too dangerous to be revealed in our own lifetimes? The most obvious examples are the so-called sealed files of Edward VIII. After his abdication and wartime flirtations with Nazi Germany, government officials compiled vast dossiers on his movements, his correspondence, and his contacts. Fragments of these files have surfaced, revealing everything from his indiscreet remarks about Britain's vulnerability to his suspicious meetings with German envoys. Yet the most sensitive files, those suggesting active collaboration or deeper personal scandals, remain locked away, embargoed for national security reasons. Historians ask, How can documents from the 1930s and 1940s still threaten Britain today? Unless, of course, they contain revelations that would undermine not just the king's reputation, but the very legitimacy of his dynasty. But Edward's case is not unique. Throughout history, royal archives have been subject to extraordinary secrecy. Consider Queen Victoria's private journals. She kept an intimate diary from her youth until her death, filling over 120 volumes. Yet after her passing, her daughter Princess Beatrice heavily edited the diaries, burning the originals after copying only suitable portions. What was erased? Entire chapters of Victoria's life, her feelings for her mother, her relationships with men like John Conroy, her grief-stricken attachment to John Brown, were cut away. If Victoria did carry a secret child in her youth, as some rumors suggest, the evidence may have been in those burned pages. What remains is not truth, but a sanitized version crafted by her descendants to preserve an image. Even further back, whispers surround the lost letters of Mary, Queen of Scots, the infamous casket letters that supposedly proved her guilt in the murder of Lord Darnley. Were they forgeries? Were they destroyed? The fact that such critical documents vanished or were tampered with reveals a pattern. When legitimacy is questioned, evidence disappears. The monarchy's survival depends not only on succession, but on controlling the story told about it. More recently, questions swirl around the archives of Prince Charles, now King Charles III, and Princess Diana. When Diana died in 1997, reports emerged of her private correspondence, letters in which she expressed fear for her safety, suspicion of plots, and her belief that she might be removed to clear the way for Charles to remarry. Some of these letters have surfaced, others have vanished, locked away by the Spencer family or by security services. Could Diana's words, if fully revealed, implicate the monarchy in her death? Or were they suppressed to prevent the collapse of public trust in an institution already shaken? Then there's the most sensitive category of all, the royal wills. In Britain, the wills of ordinary citizens are public record, but the wills of senior royals are sealed by court order, often for more than a century. This means that the legacies, financial arrangements, and personal revelations of figures like Prince Philip, Princess Margaret, or even the Queen Mother remain hidden. Why? Officials insist it is to preserve dignity. But some researchers suspect the wills may contain references to illegitimate children, hidden bequests, or evidence of relationships carefully scrubbed from official history. Each sealed will is a lockbox of potential scandal. The culture of secrecy extends into government itself. The Cabinet Office maintains a policy known as the royal veto, which allows the monarchy to review and block laws that might affect its interests. This review process, known to insiders but hidden from the public for decades, means the royal family has shaped what information could be released about its wealth, its holdings, and its history. Whenever researchers request sensitive files, they often encounter redactions, sometimes entire pages blacked out, sometimes documents withheld indefinitely. National security becomes a catch-all phrase for secrets that may in fact be about preserving royal image. Consider the strange case of the missing Prince John papers. Prince John, the epileptic youngest son of George V, was hidden from public view for most of his short life, dying in 1919 at the age of 13. For decades, his existence was scarcely acknowledged, his photographs and belongings suppressed. Only in recent years has his story been cautiously told, but many of his personal records remain missing. Why hide a child? Because the monarchy's image depended on perfection, weakness, disability, or scandal could not be allowed to mar the illusion of divine right. The esoteric and alternative historians take this secrecy further. They argue that suppressed files may contain evidence not merely of scandal, but of rival bloodlines, documents that, if revealed, would show that legitimate heirs were displaced or that illegitimate heirs were silenced. Some point to whispers of children born to mistresses, hidden in convents or adopted into aristocratic families. Others speak of coded genealogies, notes in private ledgers pointing to lines of descent erased from public records. If these exist, They would not only disrupt the Windsor narrative, but expose the fragility of hereditary monarchy itself. It is telling that some files are sealed not just for decades, but for centuries. Why must documents from the Victorian era, or even earlier, remain hidden until 2080 or beyond? Those involved are long dead. The political contexts are gone. The only explanation is that what they contain still threatens the legitimacy of today's monarchy. A letter from Queen Victoria acknowledging a hidden child, a dossier on Edward VIII's illegitimate heirs, a record of an agreement with Nazi Germany. Any of these could shake the monarchy to its core. This leads us to a chilling realization. The monarchy's power lies not in crowns or ceremonies, but in control of narrative. By locking away files, editing diaries, sealing wills, and erasing records, it has built a fortress of selective memory. We, the public, see the polished facade. Behind it lies a labyrinth of omissions, a history written with invisible ink. And so the suppressed files and lost archives become more than curiosities. They're the silent guardians of the monarchy's survival. They remind us that history is not what happened. It is what was allowed to be remembered. Somewhere in those locked cabinets may lie the smoking gun of a secret heir, a document that reveals an alternative line, a truth that could render the Windsors pretenders. Until those files are opened, if they ever are, the question will remain alive, whispered by those who sense that the official story is too clean, too seamless, too impossible to be the whole truth. Throughout history, when facts are uncertain and archives fall silent, prophecy steps in to fill the void. In the case of the British monarchy, the whispers of hidden heirs and suppressed bloodlines do not exist only in dusty genealogies. They are echoed in prophecies, poems, and esoteric traditions that stretch back centuries. If the official record has been carefully pruned, folklore and mysticism have preserved their own, stranger versions of the truth. Take, for instance, the ancient Welsh and Scottish prophecies that spoke of a king across the water. Long after the Jacobite rebellions were crushed, Highlanders continued to sing ballads and whisper tales of a rightful ruler destined to return. These were not merely nostalgic songs. They were framed as prophecy. The white rose shall bloom again, they said, referring to the Jacobite symbol, a rose in bloom even after winter. In the Scottish Highlands, seers known as the Brain Seer predicted that the line of kings would one day be restored, but only when Britain itself was at the brink of collapse. For Jacobite loyalists, these were not just poems. They were encrypted assurances that bloodlines could not be erased, only hidden until the appointed hour. Even older are the Arthurian traditions. The myth of King Arthur, the once and future king, promised to return in Britain's hour of need, has long been tied symbolically to the Stuart cause. In Jacobite lore, Bonnie Prince Charlie was sometimes cast as a kind of Arthur figure, a savior returning to reclaim what was lost. But what if that archetype still lingers? Alternative historians point to parallels: the exiled heirs, the whispers of secret survival, the belief in a king who sleeps but is not dead. The myth, they argue, is not merely legend. It is a coded memory of real dynasties suppressed but never extinguished. Prophecy also creeps into the Victorian era. Queen Victoria herself was a deeply superstitious woman. She consulted seers, read horoscopes, and believed in omens. Some occultists of her time whispered that her reign would begin a new cycle, but end in shadow. More intriguingly, fringe Victorian spiritualists claimed that a hidden child of Victoria, if one existed, would not inherit the throne, but would instead be preserved for a future era when the monarchy would falter. In other words, the bloodline would skip generations, re-emerging only at a destined moment. The 20th century brought its own prophetic visions. Nostradamus, the French seer of the 16th century, was reinterpreted during World War II by both Allied and Axis propagandists. Some of his quatrains were read as predicting the downfall of Britain's monarchy, or the emergence of a hidden king from across the seas. One striking interpretation of Century 8, Quatrain 97. At the end of the great conflict, a man from Britain will be crowned, not recognized by law, but by the people, was seized upon by occult researchers as a reference to a suppressed Stuart heir or a forgotten Windsor line. While mainstream historians dismiss such readings as fanciful, the persistence of these interpretations shows how prophecy feeds the hunger for hidden truths. And then there are the more obscure prophecies, circulating in esoteric circles rarely touched by mainstream scholarship. Among Rosicrucians and certain Masonic lodges, a tradition emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries of a sleeping king of Albion, a rightful monarch hidden away until the corruption of the realm reached its peak. In some versions, this king was linked directly to the Stuarts. In others, he was connected to a mystical bloodline said to descend from Joseph of Arimathea, the keeper of the Holy Grail, who, according to legend, brought the Grail itself to Glastonbury. If such a bloodline exists, then the monarchy we know today may stand in opposition to a far older, more sacred claim. The connection between prophecy and genealogy becomes most striking in folk tales of the hidden prince. In Cornwall, oral tradition spoke of a child hidden at birth, spirited away by monks who would one day rise to restore justice. In Ireland, similar tales fused with messianic hope for a returning ruler. These stories may seem like myth, but what if they encode fragments of real events? What if an illegitimate child of a monarch, erased from official records, lived on in peasant lore as the hidden prince? Over centuries, fact blurs into legend, and legend into prophecy. Even modern clairvoyants have added their voice to the mystery. During the 20th century, psychics and spiritualists often predicted upheaval for the British monarchy. Some claimed that the blood of the true king was still alive, hidden in obscurity, waiting to emerge in the 21st century. Others pointed to visions of an outsider, someone not raised in royal circles, suddenly revealed as carrying the blood of kings. In the wake of Princess Diana's death, certain mystics connected her to these prophecies, suggesting she had been chosen to reintroduce the blood of a rival line into the Windsor dynasty through her sons, William and Harry. If true, the hidden heir may not be someone in Bavaria or an obscure noble family. It could be bound up in the very princes the world watches today. The esoteric fascination with prophecy and monarchy always circles back to one idea: that kingship is not merely political, but mystical. The right to rule is seen as divine, connected to sacred bloodlines that cannot be erased by parliamentary decrees or wars of succession. If the Windsor dynasty is the product of political convenience and parliamentary intervention, then its authority is fragile compared to a hidden bloodline blessed by prophecy and myth. This tension between the official monarchy and the prophetic hidden king is not just academic, it has power. Even today, Jacobite societies in Scotland, esoteric groups in Europe, and fringe mystics in America speak of a true heir whose blood carries legitimacy unrecognized by law. For them, prophecy is not superstition, but a roadmap. The hidden heir will emerge, they claim, when Britain faces its greatest crisis: economic collapse, political division, or the dissolution of the monarchy itself. So we must ask, are these prophecies mere superstition, or do they encode truths deliberately obscured by official history? Could the persistence of such visions be more than imagination? An unconscious recognition that the monarchy we know is built upon omissions? If so, then prophecy itself becomes another kind of archive, not one of paper and ink, but of memory and archetype, whispering across centuries what the sealed files refuse to say aloud. In the end, prophecy does what history cannot. It refuses closure. It insists that secrets remain alive, waiting, that hidden heirs are never truly gone, only sleeping. And in that insistence lies the most unsettling possibility, that the story of the British monarchy is not finished, because the rightful king has not yet returned. If prophecies and legends keep the idea of a hidden heir alive in myth, then modern investigations attempt to drag it into the light of evidence. In the last century, genealogists, amateur historians, journalists, and even forensic scientists have turned their attention to the British monarchy's shadowy corners, chasing the possibility that somewhere outside the palaces and castles, the blood of a rightful king still flows. Their work is often dismissed by official institutions, but the fragments they uncover suggest that beneath the romance of conspiracy lies something far more tangible. The most traditional investigators are genealogists, those who trace lines of descent through parish records, baptismal registries, marriage licenses, and family Bibles. These researchers often begin with acknowledged royal mistresses, the women whose relationships with kings were whispered about but never officially admitted. Charles II, for instance, fathered at least 14 illegitimate children, many of whom were openly acknowledged and ennobled. But what about those children who were never legitimized, the ones born of more discreet liaisons? Some genealogists argue that the descendants of such unions never disappeared, but melted into the English aristocracy, their true parentage carefully veiled. A few bold researchers claim that certain dukes, viscounts, and landed gentry families of today may in fact carry Stuart or Hanoverian bloodlines more direct than the Windsors themselves. In the 20th century, journalists took this further. In the 1960s and 1970s, articles began surfacing in European and American magazines about the king in Bavaria, Franz, Duke of Bavaria, the current Jacobite heir through the Stuart line. While Franz himself never pressed a claim, the coverage highlighted a troubling fact. Under strict hereditary law, Britain's rightful monarch might not be Elizabeth II or her descendants, but a quiet duke living in Germany. Mainstream outlets dismissed it as a curiosity, but for those inclined toward alternative history, it was confirmation that the Windsors were, at best, usurpers supported by parliamentary decree rather than divine lineage. The rise of DNA technology has only intensified speculation. In recent decades, scientists have used genetic analysis to solve historical mysteries, from confirming the remains of the Romanovs to investigating Richard III's skeleton under a Leicester car park. It was inevitable that attention would turn to Britain's more recent dynasties. Some researchers have proposed that DNA samples taken from Stuart relics, such as the preserved heart of James II or the remains of Bonnie Prince Charlie's siblings, could be compared to modern claimants to verify descent. The problem? Access. Royal relics are tightly controlled, and permissions for genetic testing are almost never granted. The refusal itself raises eyebrows. If the monarchy has nothing to fear, why not allow such tests? Unless, of course, the results might show that someone outside the Windsor line carries a stronger claim. In parallel, investigative journalists have chased down rumors of hidden children in the Victorian and Edwardian eras. Stories of Queen Victoria's supposed secret offspring or Edward VIII's alleged illegitimate heirs have inspired books, documentaries, and long-form reports. While evidence is often circumstantial, a vanished servant, an unexplained pension paid quietly by the crown, a family that suddenly rose in status with no clear cause, the pattern repeats too often to dismiss. A hidden child would not be raised in poverty but comfortably, yet discreetly, given resources while their name was kept from public record. Journalists tracking these trails have unearthed tantalizing fragments, bank ledgers, anonymous letters, and oral traditions passed down through families who claim descent from someone close to the throne. One striking case involves claims of a secret child born to Edward VIII before his abdication. A Canadian family insists they are descended from such a child, pointing to photographs, family letters, and a mysterious pension arrangement. While mainstream historians scoff, forensic comparisons of facial features between Edward and the supposed descendants have circulated online, fueling speculation. Without DNA, the claim remains unproven, but it demonstrates how ordinary families can suddenly find themselves caught in the gravitational pull of royal secrecy. Meanwhile, alternative historians connect these scattered pieces into broader theories. They argue that Britain's monarchy, far from being a smooth line of succession, is riddled with missing branches, erased heirs, and unacknowledged children. Each missing file, each sealed will, each refusal of DNA testing becomes, in their eyes, evidence of suppression. The monarchy, they claim, survives not by divine right, but by controlling information, silencing inconvenient genealogies, rewarding families who keep quiet, and ridiculing those who speak too loudly. Even mainstream academia has occasionally stumbled upon unsettling evidence. In 2004, a genetic study of the Y chromosome of the House of Bourbon revealed that the Bourbon line had been broken by illegitimacy centuries earlier. This caused a storm in France, but also raised an uncomfortable question for Britain. What if the same is true of its royal house? What if, somewhere in the line from the Stuarts to the Hanoverians to the Windsors, an illegitimacy occurred that officially went unacknowledged? If so, then the true line may have splintered long ago, and the crown today may rest on a false branch. Modern investigators are not only historians and scientists. They're also conspiracy researchers, genealogical hobbyists, and even ordinary citizens compelled by family lore. The internet has amplified their voices, creating online forums and communities where supposed royal descendants compare stories, documents, and photographs. Some claims are fantastical, others eerily consistent. The sheer volume of these narratives suggests that the idea of a hidden heir resonates deeply in the collective imagination, perhaps because it challenges the notion that power is stable or absolute. What is most striking is how violently institutions resist these inquiries. Requests for access to sealed files are denied. DNA testing is blocked. Journalists who probe too deeply find doors closing. When Channel 4 in the UK aired a documentary on alternative heirs, it was heavily criticized and quietly buried. The monarchy's defenders insist this is because such claims are baseless. But for skeptics, the resistance itself is telling. If the truth were harmless, why guard it so fiercely? The convergence of genealogy, DNA, suppressed files, and modern myth-making points to one unsettling conclusion. Whether or not a hidden heir truly exists, the possibility is real enough to frighten those in power. The monarchy cannot risk the revelation of an alternative bloodline because monarchy itself depends on continuity. Break the story, and you break the spell. So the investigations continue, half in shadow, half in light. Genealogists trace faint lines on old parchment. Scientists dream of testing royal relics. Families whisper of ancestors whose parentage was never spoken of aloud. And in each effort, the same haunting question surfaces. What if the true heir is not the one on the throne? If the hidden heir is a shadow that lingers on the edges of history, then Princess Diana is the figure who brings that shadow into the modern age. Her life and tragic death were not just tabloid headlines. They were an earthquake that shook the foundations of the monarchy. To many, she was more than the people's princess. She was a disruptive force, a vessel of destiny, and in some esoteric readings, even a catalyst for the return of suppressed bloodlines. Diana Frances Spencer came from aristocracy, but not the kind that bowed easily to Windsor authority. The Spencer family was old, deeply entangled with the monarchy, with connections stretching back centuries. Some genealogists point out that the Spencers themselves may descend from older royal lines, making Diana's marriage into the House of Windsor less of an alliance and more of a reclamation. In this view, Diana didn't simply marry into royalty. She reintroduced an alternative bloodline into the throne's very heart. The marriage of Charles and Diana in 1981 was heralded as a fairy tale. Yet beneath the spectacle, it was already laced with unease. Conspiratorial whispers suggest that Diana's selection was not accidental, that she was chosen specifically because her bloodline carried echoes of rival claims to the throne. Some esoteric historians argue that this was deliberate, a way for the Windsors to absorb and neutralize competing lines of descent. By marrying her to the heir apparent, the Windsors effectively folded her ancestry into their own, making any claim she carried inseparable from theirs. But destiny rarely plays so neatly. Diana's children, William and Harry, stand as living bridges between Windsor authority and Spencer lineage. For many, This adds a mystical resonance to their existence. William, groomed for kingship, represents continuity. Harry, estranged and rebellious, represents disruption. Within conspiracy circles, Harry is sometimes framed as the wild card, the prince whose bloodline may carry hidden strands, and whose rejection of the royal fold symbolizes the eruption of suppressed history into the open. The 1990s brought Diana into direct conflict with the monarchy. Her popularity soared even as her marriage collapsed. She spoke openly of betrayal, of isolation, of forces aligned against her. To her supporters, she was not merely a princess. She was a victim of the monarchy's machinery, punished for being too independent, too beloved, too uncontainable. In this narrative, Diana's suffering is almost archetypal. The outsider bride sacrificed to preserve a fragile dynasty. Her death in Paris in 1997 only intensified these suspicions. The official narrative of a tragic car crash has never silenced speculation of conspiracy. Many believe Diana was silenced because she threatened the monarchy itself. Some claim she carried secrets about the royal family, secrets she intended to reveal. Others point to her rumored plans to remarry, potentially to Dodi Fayed, which could have complicated succession politics in ways the Windsors found intolerable. In the more esoteric interpretations, Diana's death becomes ritualistic, the extinguishing of a figure who embodied rival legitimacy, whose children might one day disrupt the monarchy's carefully constructed image. But death only magnified Diana's myth. Across the world, millions mourned her as if she were already a queen. Shrines bloomed, not unlike the veneration of saints. Candles, flowers, songs, her image became iconic, untouchable. Conspiratorial voices argue that this outpouring was no accident. It revealed a collective recognition of something deeper, a sense that Diana symbolized a truer, more authentic monarchy than the Windsors themselves. In the decades since, Diana's presence lingers like a ghost. Her face appears in dreams, in psychic visions, in countless books and documentaries. For some mystics, she is a martyr whose role was to prepare the way for revelation. They note the curious fact that both of her sons married women outside the traditional aristocratic mold, echoing Diana's own status as both insider and outsider. William's union with Kate Middleton and Harry's with Meghan Markle seemed to push the monarchy further from its insulated traditions. To some, this is a sign of dilution. To others, it is a continuation of Diana's disruptive legacy. There are even whispers that Diana knew more about hidden heirs than she ever revealed. Friends reported her fascination with history, with family trees, with the peculiarities of royal succession. Some claim she once joked that the monarchy was all smoke and mirrors, that bloodlines were never as simple as they appeared. Whether she meant this literally or metaphorically is unclear, but her remark resonates eerily with the suspicions of alternative historians. And then there is the symbolism. Diana often appeared in white, evoking purity, martyrdom, even saintliness. In the language of myth, she becomes the sacrificed queen whose blood nourishes renewal. This archetype repeats across history. In Arthurian legend, Guinevere's fall fractures Camelot. In French history, Marie Antoinette becomes the tragic queen whose death heralds revolution. Diana stands within this lineage of symbolic queens, whose fates signal change for the realm. In esoteric prophecy circles, Diana's legacy takes an even stranger form. Some claim she was destined to be the mother of the return, that her children would one day connect to hidden bloodlines that eclipse the Windsors. Others argue that Harry, in particular, carries this destiny, that his estrangement from the monarchy is not rebellion but fate, marking him as a vessel for something older, something suppressed. His marriage outside traditional bounds only deepens the symbolism, a break from the insular bloodlines that have long defined European royalty. Today, as William edges closer to kingship, the shadow of Diana hovers. Every photograph of him recalls her face. Every public appearance of Harry revives the tension she embodied. Diana's bloodline is alive at the very center of the monarchy, yet her ghost stands in opposition to it, a reminder of both its cruelty and its fragility. In the end, Diana may not have been a hidden heir herself, but she became the conduit, the living proof that alternative bloodlines are not theoretical, but real, woven directly into the House of Windsor. Her life and death transformed the monarchy from an institution of unquestioned authority into a stage haunted by suppressed truths. And in that haunting, the figure of the hidden heir gains power. Because if Diana could disrupt the throne so profoundly, what might an undiscovered descendant, an heir with both legitimacy and prophecy behind them, be able to do? Diana's story closes one chapter but opens another. For in her legacy lies the bridge between myth and modernity, between prophecy and reality, between secrecy and revelation. And if her sons, particularly William and Harry, embody both Windsor power and Spencer disruption, then perhaps they are not merely princes of the realm. Perhaps they are the living battleground upon which the hidden heir's shadow still falls. For hours we have wandered through archives, prophecies, genealogies, and whispers. We have seen how history bends under the weight of omission, how prophecy insists on return, and how modern investigations circle around gaps that refuse to close. But now, at this turning point, we arrive at the question that has haunted this journey from the very beginning. Who is the hidden heir who could shatter the British monarchy? The possibilities are many, and each one carries the potential to upend everything we think we know about the crown. The first candidate often discussed in alternative history circles is Franz, Duke of Bavaria, the so-called king across the water. Through the Jacobite succession, he is the senior descendant of the House of Stuart, the line displaced in 1688 by the Glorious Revolution. If hereditary law were followed strictly, Franz, not Charles III, would sit upon the throne of Britain today. He himself has never pursued this claim, living quietly in Munich, respected but politically irrelevant. Yet his existence alone is enough to remind us that the Windsor dynasty is not the only royal line Britain could have chosen to honor. Should the people decide legitimacy lies with history rather than Parliament, Franz, or his successors, could become symbols of a very different monarchy. But perhaps the hidden heir is not so obvious, not so visible. Alternative researchers have long whispered of a Stuart child who survived in secret, spirited away during the turbulence of the 18th century. Legends persist of a child of Bonnie Prince Charlie or his siblings, concealed to protect them from Hanoverian wrath. Could their bloodline survive, tucked away in rural estates or continental exiles, waiting for recognition? If such a descendant were ever proven, through DNA, through documents, through some miraculous unveiling, it would rewrite 3 centuries of British history in a single stroke. Another possibility lies closer to the throne itself. Genealogists who study the Victorian era point to the strange silences around Queen Victoria's supposed offspring. What if one of her rumored secret children truly existed and lived to found a family line? That line, theoretically, could be alive today. If uncovered, it would not be a Jacobite claim, but a Windsor-adjacent one. An heir who combines legitimacy with secrecy, who might even outrank today's royals if proven. Imagine the chaos if a middle-class British family, descended from an erased Victorian child, were suddenly revealed to have the strongest legal claim to the throne. And then, there are the most modern and explosive theories, those that circle around Diana and her children. Some esoteric interpretations argue that Harry, not William, is the true vessel of alternative legitimacy. William represents the continuity of Windsor power, carefully groomed, presented, and protected. Harry, estranged and rebellious, is cast as the rogue element, the one whose bloodline may carry suppressed rival strands, whose choices fracture the monarchy's facade. Within conspiracy circles, Harry is sometimes whispered to embody the archetype of the hidden heir, not because he is literally unknown, but because his destiny diverges from the scripted Windsor path. If his descent, through Diana, connects to older rival claims, then his rejection of the royal fold could signal the unconscious reemergence of a suppressed dynasty. This is where myth and reality fuse most dangerously. The monarchy is not merely a family. It is a story, a performance, a binding myth. What would happen if that myth were ruptured by evidence of a rival heir? If DNA testing revealed that a Bavarian duke, a Scottish farmer, or even a disillusioned prince carried a stronger claim? The monarchy rests on the appearance of inevitability. Break that illusion, and its power evaporates. Consider the legal implications. Britain has no mechanism for resolving such a crisis. Parliament declared the Hanoverians rightful rulers in 1701 with the Act of Settlement. But if evidence emerged tomorrow proving a Stuart line survived, what then? Legally, the crown might still belong to them. Yet politically, it would be unthinkable. Would Britain depose its monarch? Would it recognize a German duke or a forgotten branch of the Spencer line? Or would it ignore the truth entirely, preserving the Windsor dynasty by force of inertia? The cultural implications would be even greater. The monarchy functions not just as government, but as symbol. Millions of people around the world, in the Commonwealth and beyond, anchor their sense of tradition and identity to the House of Windsor. To discover that this house is a facade built on erasures would unravel centuries of loyalty. The crown would no longer seem timeless. It would seem temporary, contingent, a performance masking fragile truths. And in that unraveling lies the possibility of collapse. The monarchy has already endured scandal, abdication, and rebellion. But a hidden heir represents something different. It is not moral failure. It is not personal scandal. It is existential illegitimacy. It suggests that every coronation, every oath, every image of continuity was built on sand. For a monarchy that relies on ritual and faith, this would be fatal. The climactic revelation, then, is not a single name, but a truth more dangerous, that hidden heirs do not need to be proven to destabilize the crown. The possibility alone, the suspicion that the story is incomplete, is enough. Every sealed file, every blocked DNA test, every whispered family story adds weight to the doubt. And in that doubt, the monarchy begins to fracture. For centuries, the British monarchy has survived wars, revolutions, and scandals by presenting itself as inevitable. But inevitability is fragile. Show the people that another heir could exist, whether in Bavaria, in the Highlands, or hidden within Diana's own lineage, and the spell breaks. What was eternal becomes negotiable. What was sacred becomes questionable. So the revelation is this: the monarchy endures only as long as the hidden heir remains hidden. Should that veil ever be lifted, should evidence ever emerge that the throne belongs elsewhere, the crown as we know it could not survive. It would shatter, not through violence or revolt, but through the slow collapse of belief. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The monarchy, that ancient symbol of stability, may be undone not by enemies from without, but by the ghosts of its own bloodlines, by the heirs it tried hardest to erase. If a hidden heir truly exists, and if one day their identity came to light, what then? History is full of claimants, some credible, some delusional, who tried to assert their place on a throne. Yet never before has the world been so connected, so quick to spread revelation, so capable of testing the truth with science. The modern age is a dangerous stage for ancient secrets, and the British monarchy, already under strain, would find itself facing its most catastrophic crisis yet. Imagine the moment: a DNA test confirmed, a document unsealed, or a photograph discovered in an archive that proves beyond dispute that another line, whether Stuart, Victorian, or even within the Spencer bloodline, has a superior claim. The news would break first online, a whisper on a forum, a genealogical blog. Then, within hours, global headlines. Suddenly, the crown's centuries of authority would be questioned not in the shadows, but in the blinding glare of mass media. The immediate response would be disbelief. Royal commentators would scramble to dismiss the evidence. Palace officials would issue statements, calling it speculative or without merit. But in the age of the internet, official denial carries little weight. Independent journalists, podcasters, and researchers would seize the story. Social media would amplify it, memes and hashtags spreading faster than any official correction. Within days, the question would be unavoidable. What if the monarch we see is not the rightful ruler? The implications would ripple through law and politics. Britain has no clear protocol for this scenario. The Act of Settlement of 1701 and subsequent laws define succession. But if a hidden heir were proven to exist, the legal foundation of the monarchy itself would be exposed as fragile. Could Parliament strip the Windsors of their crown and install a new line? Legally, yes. Politically, it would be unthinkable. The monarchy, for all its pomp, is ultimately a creation of law and tradition. If those laws and traditions collapse under the weight of new evidence, the crown could cease to exist altogether. Consider the chaos it would cause across the Commonwealth. Nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand recognize the monarch as head of state. If legitimacy were challenged, each of these countries would face its own constitutional crisis. Would they follow the new heir, reject both, and declare independence? The ripple effect could dismantle the Commonwealth entirely, leaving Britain isolated and stripped of symbolic power. The Church of England, too, would be drawn into turmoil. The monarch is its supreme governor, a role tied to the very identity of English Christianity. If the monarch were illegitimate, what of the Church's authority? Every royal wedding, every coronation, every oath sworn in God's name would be tainted. For a nation already struggling with faith and identity, the revelation could deepen cultural fractures beyond repair. And then there is the human element, the Windsors themselves. How would Charles, William, or George react to being told they are not rightful kings? Would they resist, dismiss, or quietly negotiate with the rival line? The monarchy thrives on spectacle, but spectacle can turn to humiliation overnight. Imagine the psychological toll of living one's entire life as heir apparent, only to discover it was never yours to inherit. Public reaction would be divided. For monarchists, it would be devastating, a betrayal of trust. For Republicans, it would be vindication, proof that monarchy itself is an outdated, corrupt institution. For others, it would ignite fascination, a new drama, a living legend unfolding before their eyes. The heir, if they chose to step forward, could become a celebrity overnight, whether embraced or ridiculed. Their life would change irreversibly, as would the lives of every Windsor. But what if the heir was not a duke in Bavaria or a noble in Scotland? What if they were ordinary? A teacher in Canada, a farmer in Australia, a factory worker in Glasgow? How would the world respond to a king or queen hidden in plain sight, suddenly thrust into the role of potential monarch? The contrast between palace grandeur and ordinary life would captivate the public imagination. It would also humiliate the Windsors, exposing the monarchy as an outdated performance clinging to ceremony while the real heir lived unnoticed among the people. Security concerns would erupt immediately. The heir, whether willing or not, would become a target. Media intrusion, political manipulation, and even threats of violence could follow. Governments would be forced to decide whether to protect them, silence them, or co-opt them into the narrative. The monarchy's survival strategy might not be to confront the heir, but to absorb them, offering titles or wealth in exchange for silence. History has seen this before. Inconvenient heirs bought off, hidden in plain sight, their claims erased not by law but by secrecy. Yet in the modern era, suppression is harder. DNA databases grow every year. Amateur genealogists can access records once reserved for professionals. A single leak can undo centuries of concealment. The monarchy's greatest enemy may not be a claimant with ambition, but truth itself. Truth discovered in a lab, shared on a smartphone, and believed by millions. And what a prophecy! If the heir were revealed during a time of national crisis, economic decline, political division, or even a collapse of the monarchy's popularity, The narrative would become irresistible. They would not merely be an heir. They would be the heir foretold, the king or queen destined to return. Myth and reality would fuse. Movements could rally around them, demanding change not just to monarchy, but to government itself. The heir would become a symbol, not only of legitimacy, but of revolution. In such a scenario, the monarchy would face three choices. 1. Deny and suppress, using law, media, and power to bury the revelation. 2. Co-opt, drawing the heir into the Windsor fold, erasing conflict by absorbing their claim. Or 3. Collapse, admitting the truth and dismantling the institution before it crumbles from within. None of these paths preserves the monarchy as we know it. This is the heart of the danger. The hidden heir does not need to seize the throne to shatter it. Their mere existence, proven or even strongly suspected, is enough. The monarchy relies on an illusion of continuity, of inevitability, of divine right passing smoothly from one head to another. Break that illusion, and the institution withers. So we ask, what if the heir emerged today? The answer is not a coronation. It is collapse. The monarchy would not be overthrown by revolution, but by revelation, by truth too long buried, finally forced into the light. And in that collapse, Britain itself would be forced to confront a deeper question. Does it cling to the ancient illusion of kingship, or does it step into a future where legitimacy is not inherited, but chosen? The crown has always appeared eternal. Its jewels glint under the lights of Westminster Abbey. Its ceremonies echo with chants and trumpets that seem older than memory itself. And yet, for all its grandeur, the monarchy is perhaps the most fragile of institutions, because it is not built on force, but on faith. A faith that the line is unbroken, that the sovereign is rightful, that the crown is more than costume and theater. Section by section, we have followed the shadows of history to see how fragile that faith truly is. Now, as we step back from the hidden heir's labyrinth, the question that remains is this: can the monarchy survive its own ghosts? One possibility is denial. The monarchy has faced crises before: the abdication of Edward VIII, the death of Diana, the scandals of Prince Andrew, and each time it has weathered the storm by refusing to yield. If evidence of a hidden heir ever emerged, palace officials could simply deny it. The machinery of state, the press sympathetic to the crown, and the sheer inertia of tradition would work to smother revelation in ridicule. Conspiracy, they would call it fantasy. And for many, that would be enough. For the monarchy has always been sustained less by truth than by performance. As long as the performance continues, the illusion endures. But illusions crack. Each denial, each refusal to confront evidence, leaves questions lingering. And questions are poison to an institution that relies on unquestioning loyalty. For younger generations already skeptical of monarchy, the refusal to acknowledge legitimate doubts could tip the balance toward outright rejection. The monarchy may find itself not shattered in an instant, but eroded steadily by suspicion, until one day the people simply stop believing. Another path is adaptation. Monarchies that survive do so by changing shape. The Dutch, the Swedes, the Spaniards all have adapted to modernity by trimming power and embracing transparency. Could the Windsors do the same? Could they admit the possibility of hidden heirs, acknowledge the complexity of their history, and yet remain symbols of continuity? In theory, yes. But monarchy thrives on simplicity: one crown, one heir, one line. To admit multiple possibilities is to weaken the spell. A king whose authority is conditional is no king at all. He is a politician in fancy dress. There is also the path of absorption. If an heir emerged with undeniable legitimacy, the Windsors could attempt to embrace them. Titles could be offered, honors bestowed. Their story could be woven into the royal tapestry, not as rival, but as distant cousin, a curiosity folded into the pageantry. This strategy has precedent. Inconvenient claimants throughout history have been pacified with wealth or position. Yet in the modern age, such absorption may not satisfy. For the heir might not accept erasure. or the public, fascinated by their story, might refuse to let it fade. And then there is the final path, collapse. It may come not with riots in the streets or armies at the gates, but with a quiet vote, a referendum, a decision that the monarchy no longer serves the nation. The revelation of a hidden heir could act as catalyst, giving Republicans the momentum they have long lacked. One day, the crown could be locked away in a museum, its authority dissolved, its heirs reduced to private citizens. Britain would join the long list of nations that once bowed to kings but outgrew the myth. Yet even collapse is never complete. The monarchy would live on in memory, in story, in legend. And perhaps that is its true destiny, not as ruler, but as mythic symbol, as a stage on which Britain has acted its dramas for centuries. The hidden heir, revealed or not, becomes part of that myth. Their story is inseparable from the monarchy's own, a reminder that behind the pomp and spectacle lies a messy, human tale of ambition, secrecy, and survival. It is this fragility, the gap between spectacle and truth, that makes the monarchy so captivating. The crown is powerful not because it commands armies, but because it commands imagination. Once that imagination is fractured by suspicion, by revelation, by whispers of heirs and shadow, its power dissolves. The jewels sparkle still, the trumpets still sound, but the spell is broken. And yet, even in fragility, there is resilience. The monarchy has endured for over 1,000 years precisely because it embodies paradox. It is both ancient and reinvented, sacred and theatrical, timeless and temporary. Perhaps it will survive hidden heirs as it has survived revolutions, wars, and betrayals, by bending without breaking, by absorbing myth into its own story until the boundary between truth and performance vanishes. But for those who look closer, who peer into archives, prophecies, and genealogies, the truth cannot be so easily erased. The suspicion remains that the monarchy is not inevitable, not eternal, not unquestionable. That another heir exists, unseen but real, whose claim is stronger than the one enshrined on Coronation Day. If so, then the British monarchy stands on knife's edge. Its survival depends not on armies or politics, but on secrecy, on the ability to keep that heir forever hidden. For should the veil lift, the crown would not merely be questioned. It would be shattered. The hidden heir, whether legend or truth, is therefore not just a figure of history. They are a mirror held up to the monarchy itself, reflecting its greatest strength and its deepest weakness. A reminder that even the most dazzling crowns are fragile things, and that beneath the gold lies glass. And perhaps that is where we must leave the monarchy, in a place of paradox. At once powerful and precarious, eternal and temporary, a crown glittering with jewels, yet haunted always by the shadow of the one who might rightfully wear it. Every mystery we have explored in this journey, from sealed documents and whispered prophecies to forgotten genealogies and shadowed heirs, leads us to a single realization. Some questions are never meant to be answered. Or perhaps they are answered, but only in fragments, leaving just enough to keep us searching, imagining, wondering. The tale of the hidden heir is one such mystery. Whether fact or legend, whether buried in archives or alive in flesh and blood, it has already achieved its true purpose. It unsettles us. Why does this story grip so deeply? Perhaps because it speaks to something primal. Across civilizations, the question of who has the right to rule has shaped empires, toppled dynasties, and ignited revolutions. Legitimacy is not just paperwork. It is the glue that binds power to belief. And when legitimacy is questioned, when a rival heir emerges from shadow, we are forced to confront the fragility of every throne, every crown, every empire. For Britain, the monarchy is not merely a relic of the past. It is woven into the nation's identity, its rituals, its pageantry, its very sense of continuity. The coronation is not just a ceremony. It is a spell cast upon millions, reminding them that the crown has endured unbroken, for over 1,000 years. Yet the hidden heir story whispers, what if that spell is flawed? What if the unbroken line is not unbroken at all? And here lies the enduring tension. History books tell one story, but the gaps, the silences, the anomalies, these invite another. Between the official record and the suppressed archive, between the royal proclamation and the folk memory, lies a shadow kingdom of possibility. It is in this liminal space that the hidden heir lives. Not fully proven, not fully dismissed, forever suspended in the realm of what if. What makes the hidden heir so haunting is that their existence cannot be disproven. Unless every record is examined, every lineage tested, every secret unsealed, the possibility endures. And even if all were examined, doubt would remain, for history is not a fixed truth but a narrative shaped by those with power. The very act of suppression fuels the myth. Each denial by the palace, each missing document in the archive, is not an answer, but an invitation to question further. This is why the story endures. Because in the end, it is not only about the monarchy. It is about us, about our hunger for hidden truths, our suspicion of authority, our fascination with bloodlines and destiny. The hidden heir represents the dream of disruption, that even the mightiest institutions are vulnerable, that the world could shift overnight with the revelation of a name, a face, a lineage. Perhaps the heir exists. Perhaps they do not. Perhaps they live in obscurity, unaware of their birthright, or perhaps they know and choose silence. Perhaps their line was extinguished long ago, leaving only rumors in dusty books. Or perhaps one day, in some quiet town or crowded city, they will step forward, not with an army, but with evidence. And if they do, the world will never be the same. But even if they never come, their shadow already works upon the present. Each royal scandal, each crisis of legitimacy, is magnified by the possibility of another claimant. The heir does not need to appear to shatter the monarchy. Their mere myth is enough to remind us that the crown is not inevitable, that it can be questioned, that it can fall. And maybe this is why the monarchy fights so hard to maintain its pageantry, its silence, its secrecy. It knows the truth. The crown is not made of gold. It is made of belief, and belief is fragile. So the hidden heir remains, part history, part legend, part prophecy. A figure who may never step into the light, yet whose shadow looms across centuries. For every coronation, every oath, every proclamation of continuity carries within it an unspoken question. Is this truly the rightful sovereign? As we close this journey, we are left not with answers but with echoes. The echo of Stuart claimants who dreamed of return. The echo of secret marriages and illegitimate children hidden from history. The echo of prophecies whispering of a king yet to come. The echo of modern fears that the monarchy itself rests on a foundation of sand. The hidden heir may never be proven. They may never seize the throne, but they will never die as a story. For so long as people gather to question, to wonder, to seek, the heir will remain alive in imagination, haunting the palace halls and stirring unease in every royal proclamation. And that, perhaps, is their true power. Not to wear the crown, but to haunt it. Not to reign, but to remind us that no reign is ever secure. That beneath the diamonds and ceremonies lies a fragile secret. That history could have been different and might yet be. So we end where we began, in mystery. The heir exists and does not. They are hidden and they are present in every doubt. Their face is unknown, yet we see it in every royal portrait, wondering if the true sovereign gazes back at us. In the end, the hidden heir is not just a story of monarchy. It is a mirror, reflecting our own yearning for hidden truths, our suspicion of power, our fascination with the thin line between myth and history. And like all the great mysteries, it will never die, because perhaps the real heir is not out there, waiting to be found. Perhaps the real heir lives here, in the story itself, in the restless human imagination that refuses to accept what it is told, that insists on asking, What if? And as long as that question lingers, the hidden heir will never truly vanish. They will walk beside every monarch crowned, every anthem sung, every throne ascended. Unseen, unheard, but never absent. The shadow sovereign. The secret that haunts the crown. The mystery that never dies.